Hi, friends. This month I am going into the archives, and you are getting access to a previously only bonus episode story, which is about a couple of great Greek myths. I hope you enjoy it. What do you know about Greek mythology? Greek mythology is a vast body of myths that were told by the ancient Greeks, probably adapted themselves and added onto from the mythology of the even more ancient Mesopotamians. These myths helped explain the world around them, and Greek myths were later adapted by the Romans. Many of our modern words and legends can themselves be traced back to these tales. You may have heard some of these wonderful stories and legends already, or you may not know any of them yet. Either way, I hope you enjoy diving into two of them today. Before we do delve into these myths, you may recall that one of our sheep, Cricket, does not shed his hair the way the rest of our sheep do. I've been gradually working on shearing him through the course of the spring and summer whenever I can get my hands on him for a few minutes. First, I started with manual hand shears, which we both hated, and now I have an electric shaver that he also hates, but I find much easier. Cricket is mostly shaved now and is clearly a lot cooler than he was, but he deeply resents my interfering with him to arrive at being freed of this woolly burden. So I have his wool strewn about the pasture, and I walk across it multiple times a day when I'm outside doing things. That and my current indulgence in revisiting some of my favorite Greek myths has me thinking about fiber and the way that we use it. Wool was an incredibly important material throughout human history, and the process of getting it into usable thread before machines was quite involved. You have to first wash the wool and dry it. That's straightforward enough. And then you have to pick out any debris that might be hiding in the wool. Twigs and thorns, all of those things, to get it really clean. And then you fluff up the wool to prepare it for carding. This is called teasing the wool. Carding, which comes next, is a process where you apply it onto hand cards. These cards are basically wooden paddles with hundreds of tiny metal teeth attached, sort of like a very prickly brush you might use on your dog. You put the wool on one card and then you comb the wool back and forth between the two cards. The tiny teeth brush the fiber of the wool to open it more than you can with just doing that teasing with your fingers where you're pulling the wool apart. And that results in smooth yarn instead of bumpy, knotted yarn that's hard to work with. After you've thoroughly carded your wool, you roll the results into a tube shape by curling the wool in on itself like you're rolling up a rug, and then you can move on to spinning the wool. There are many ways to spin wool. You might be familiar with spinning wheels, but in ancient times, hand spinning was the way things were done. It involved twisting the fibers you created into yarn using a drop spindle, which is basically a tapered rod with a round disc attached. When you attach your fibers and spin the spindle, it twists them and winds them into thread. It's called a drop spindle because you drop it down and spin it to twist and form the yarn. Think of it kind of like a yo-yo that you don't roll back up into your hand. Not quite right, but it might help you get the idea. I haven't tried making Cricket's wool into yarn myself yet, but I think about it every time I pass the pile of wool. I'm currently hoping that birds will take it for nests, since it is very good for that. You can see just from this short overview that spinning and creating thread is a very involved process, and perhaps it helps us imagine why thread and the weaving of thread feature prominently in several Greek myths. Today, I'm going to focus on adapting two myths related to thread, those twisted filaments or fibers that are used for sewing, weaving, and on their own merits to solve tricky problems. Our first myth is called An Impossible Puzzle, the Shell and the Thread. One of the most famed craftsmen and inventors of the ancient world was known as Daedalus. He appears in many myths, but this one involves a riddle. After a series of tragedies, Daedalus had set himself up in a new city, in the kingdom of King Cocalus, trying to make a life for himself, far from the troubles of his past. But there was an evil king named Minos who was searching for Daedalus. Minos didn't want the inventor to set up a happy new life for himself, but he knew that if he hunted for Daedalus too obviously, he would never find the brilliant craftsman. He came up with a plan to trick Daedalus into revealing himself. King Minos devised a puzzle that he believed only the clever Daedalus would be wise and crafty enough to solve. He then sent word to all the kings of the known world that whoever could solve this puzzle would be showered with riches, whether it was the king or one of their subjects. And what was this incredibly challenging puzzle? Minos asked that they figure out how to string a thread through a conch shell. A conch shell is a large, beautiful shell, pointed at both ends, with a wide lip that opens into a beautifully pink glimpse of the shell's interior. If you've ever seen someone use a shell like a trumpet in a movie, a conch shell is often what they are using. You can place your hand in the lip and blow through it to make noise. At any rate, just like the wool we talked about, these shells are sort of rolled on the inside, so that the inside of the shell is a spiraling maze that you can't see from the outside. Getting a thread through the spirals of the shell frankly seemed impossible even to Minos, but he knew that Daedalus couldn't resist a puzzle, especially an impossible one, and so he sent out word and waited. Many tried and failed at the puzzle. Many kings came to Minos to complain in person of the impossibility of solving it. It simply could not be done without destroying the shell. But Minos simply laughed at them. He knew that it would be solved soon enough. And so it was. Minos was in his garden smelling the sweet blooming roses one morning when none other than King Cocalus himself ran out waving his hands.
"I've solved it, Minos! I've solved it!" he cried in triumph.
"You've solved it, really?" Minos demanded sarcastically. "Many kings have come here in despair. I hate to seem skeptical, my dear King Cocalus, but I hardly think you are wiser or craftier than any of them."
"Indeed I have, Minos, and if you'll get off your high horse for a moment, I'll show you,"
Cocalus responded in a rather offended tone.
"Oh, very well, Cocalus, please do,"
Minos drawled, as if he weren't very interested. But inside, he was on fire. He knew Cocalus himself could never solve such a difficult puzzle, which, if it had truly been solved, meant that he had finally found Daedalus's hiding spot. Cocalus called for a table to be set up, the better to observe his solution. He then produced a conch shell with a hole drilled in the top. The bottom, as with many conch shells, was already open. At the open end, he smeared a bit of honey, and, calling one of his servants forward, he divulged a large ant from a container in his robes. By now, a crowd had gathered, and when the ant appeared, a wave of mocking laughter rolled through the onlookers. Cocalus was unbothered by the laughter. He instructed the servant to hold the ant, and then from another pocket produced an incredibly fine red thread, so thin and perfect that you almost weren't sure if it was there, if you weren't looking right at it. This Cocalus somehow tied between the ant's thorax and abdomen, that oh-so-thin part of an ant's body, leaving a long trail running behind the ant. Now the crowd was intrigued. What on earth was Cocalus doing? He placed the ant into the hole that had been drilled in the normally closed end of the conch shell. Everyone seemed to hold their breath. Even Minos was transfixed, watching the trail of thread behind the ant become smaller and smaller as the ant worked its way through the maze of the shell's spiral. After an impatient period of waiting, the ant emerged. It dashed towards the honey and began frantically gathering it. Shouts of pleasure and congratulations rang out. Coquelis had solved it. In its eagerness to get to the honey at the other end, the ant had wound its way through the shell, solved the maze, and emerged on the other side.
"Oh, well done, Coquelis,"
Minos drawled, slapping the other king firmly on his back.
"Why, I thought this puzzle would never be solved. How clever of you." "Oh, thank you, Minos, thank you. It wasn't so very difficult after all,"
Coquelis responded, hugely pleased with himself.
"You've certainly earned your prize," Minos said slyly. "But first, a feast," he declared, ushering Coquelis and his retinue along to a table laden with every good thing a weary traveler could want. Coquelis gorged himself on the delicious food and wine, never suspecting that he had betrayed Daedalus to his worst enemy. We'll save King Minos' attempt to catch Daedalus for another time, but do you think that King Minos really stands much of a chance of catching the brilliant inventor? I don't think so. For today, let us appreciate the way that a humble string in the hands of a genius can solve an impossible puzzle. Our next story is the tale of Arachne. In a small village, there once lived a young woman named Arachne. As Arachne grew up, it became clear that she was an artistic genius in the craft of weaving. In the same way that Monet or Frida Kahlo could sit before a blank canvas and create a masterpiece with paints, so Arachne created incomparable works of art when she sat or stood before her loom and wove her cloths and tapestries. In case you're not familiar with loom weaving, a loom is a device used to weave thread together. In ancient Greece, Arachne might have used what is known as a warp-weighted loom, which is essentially a large rectangular wooden frame that can be leaned against the wall. A cylindrical crossbar or beam forms the top of the rectangle. It is supported in notches that are connected to the upright poles that you lean against the wall. Long strands of yarn hang from this crossbar, and those strands of yarn that hang down are called warp yarns or threads. At the bottom of the loom is a second rod called a shed rod, and that forms the horizontal base of the rectangle. In the middle of the loom, you have another crossbar called a heddle bar, to which some of the warp yarns are looped to form what's known as leashes. At the base of the loom, you then tie weights to the bottom of the warp yarns to keep the threads taut. Weavers must then work other threads horizontally through these vertical warp threads. The horizontal threads form what is known as the weft. Front and back, they weave through the warp threads, sometimes using a device called a shuttle, which is a wooden tool that stores the yarn, creating the weft. A weaver works the thread, and as the vertical warp threads and horizontal weft threads become interlaced, a cloth begins to take shape. Weavers start at the top of the loom and work towards the ground, walking back and forth as they do so. It's complicated to explain, but if you imagine a big rectangle leaning against a wall covered in threads that run down the loom like a waterfall that you then interlace to form a cloth, you'll have the general idea. At this art, Arachne excelled. By the time she was a teenager, word of her incredible artistry had spread far and wide from her small village. Wealthy merchants came from across the sea to place competing bids for her creations, and no two were ever the same. Beautiful landscapes, enchanting depictions of magical creatures, abstract creations, and dazzlingly intricate patterns. Arachne could do it all, and in a fraction of the time it took even professional weavers.
Arachne knew that she was talented and fast because, in addition to the merchants and servants of wealthy kings and queens who sought her out to compete over her work, other talented weavers often also came to find her as well. This was good business for everyone. Another master weaver would appear, usually accompanied by a servant or family member or two who carried her loom, and would challenge Arachne to a contest. These contests would draw crowds from miles around, and at the end, both weavers would be able to sell their art for a nice sum. Arachne always won, of course. She'd never yet met anyone who could produce tapestries even half so beautiful as her own. But both weavers benefited, and the defeated artist could leave for their home villages with a fat purse and an enchanting story of competing with the famed Arachne. It served to increase the fame and renown of both artists. This was, however, a time when humans lived alongside immortals, which are beings that live forever, and other magical creatures. Some of these magical creatures had taken an interest in Arachne. Nature spirits called nymphs, who usually looked like young women, had begun to hero worship Arachne's art. When a contest was called, they were always drawn out of their trees and rivers to watch her weave. "Oh," breathed one as she watched Arachne at her loom. "Surely Arachne must have been taught by the goddess Athena herself, for no other mortal has ever had such magic in their weaving." You may already know of Athena, the immortal goddess of reason, wisdom, and courage, who is the daughter of Zeus. Zeus was the self-styled king of heaven and leader of those immortals whom he had decreed to be gods. In addition to Athena's grand charges of reason, wisdom, and courage, she was also the goddess of weaving. Athena heard the nymph's claim and became interested in the talented young artist. Arachne had not been taught by Athena, but Athena thought that if the young woman really was so talented, that perhaps she ought to take her under her wing in reality and help her further improve her craft. Now, the gods and goddesses of Greek mythology are tricky beings, and Athena devised a way to test Arachne and see if she was worthy of becoming her pupil. She disguised herself as an old woman and showed up one morning walking up the lane to Arachne's home, appearing to be bent over by the weight of carrying the pieces of her own loom. Arachne, for her part, was not particularly surprised to see another would-be competitor walking towards her home, though this woman was much older and more fragile-looking than she was used to. Why, the poor old thing looked as if the weight of the pieces of her loom were about to break her back. Arachne hurried out of the house and helped the old woman take the loom off her back. "Hello, my child," Athena creaked, using the voice that matched her body. "Are you the young weaver everyone is talking of?" "Oh, perhaps," Arachne said with a smile. "My name is Arachne. Who might you be?" "Oh, no one at all, no one at all," Athena assured her, waving her hands. "Just an old woman who has come from far away to see if the famed Arachne would care to have a weaving contest with one who has many years in the art behind her." "Of course, grandmother," Arachne said politely. "Let me help you get your loom set up. And while I do, please have breakfast. Then, when you're feeling ready, we'll have a bit of a contest." Arachne led the old woman into her home and sat her at the table, providing her with a hearty meal, while Arachne worked to set up the woman's loom next to her own. "My dear," Athena said, "I have heard it said that you're so talented Athena herself must have taught you. Can that be right? Are you her pupil?" "Oh, no!" Arachne exclaimed as she hefted the cylindrical beam into the top of the other woman's loom. "No, I was not so fortunate, but I expect at this point she couldn't have much to teach me anyway. I've never met someone who is a better weaver than me, and I don't really imagine I ever will. Now, We can admit that this was rather arrogant of Arachne, especially when a stranger had come to compete with her. But if she was arrogant, perhaps we can forgive her. She defeated every challenger for years. She was widely regarded as the most talented weaver to ever have lived, and she had been kind to this stranger. "Oh no," Athena wheedled. "What if, say, the goddess herself challenged you to a contest? Do you not think she would surpass you, even as you have surpassed so many others?" Arachne laughed. "Well, I can't imagine she'd ever have time to challenge the likes of me, but if she did, I think I could hold my own in any weaving contest, even one against such a great one as Athena herself." "Boastful, arrogant child!" Athena roared, throwing off her disguise and standing before Arachne in all her shining, unearthly glory. "How dare you compare yourself to me?" "Oh, radiant goddess Athena, I apologize," Arachne cried. "I did not know it was you, and I would never have been so bold if I had. But," Arachne trailed off. "But what, mortal?" Athena boomed. "Well, I really am very talented," Athena said. She had worked hard and was proud of herself, even when faced with a furious goddess. "If we had a contest, I think I could be judged the better weaver." "You shall have your contest, mortal," Athena seethed. And if you win, I shall reward you with a loom of solid gold, covered in golden thread, to make the most dazzling tapestry ever known. And if you lose, I shall punish you in any way I deem fit." Arachne wasn't afraid of competing with Athena. She probably should have been, because, like all the other gods and goddesses who ruled over humanity in this time, Athena was proud and jealous. Oh, she may have been more reasoned and reasonable than some of her siblings. As the goddess of wisdom, she did feel that was her obligation, but Athena still had a furious temper. And Arachne had raised the temper of a goddess. Punishments from the gods were not known for being lenient. But Arachne was young and confident and thought little of one more weaving contest. "Very well," Arachne agreed. "Let us set up our looms, and we shall see who the crowd deems a more talented weaver." So saying, she went to her loom and began laying out her threads. Still fuming, Athena stalked to her own loom and did the same. Having heard the commotion coming from the house, nymphs appeared, and soon after them the villagers and neighbors from far and wide. This promised to be the most exciting contest of their lifetime. A goddess competing against a mortal? Few ever saw such a thing, and fewer still ever dared to boldly compete with a god, as the young Arachne was doing. They both ignored the crowd. Arachne sincerely because she was used to it, and Athena pretending to. Her pride was wounded just competing with a mortal. Having a rapt audience felt embarrassing. Should she really have lowered herself to compete with some upstart young mortal? But she was in it now, and they both wove furiously. After some time, it became clear that Athena was weaving a tapestry that depicted the gods and goddesses, her siblings, father, other relatives, in all their glory. Beautiful, magnificent, awe-inspiring, and fearsome, her tapestry captured the magic and aura the immortals exuded. Next to her, Arachne was portraying the gods as well. But her own ego pricked by the taunting and anger of Athena, Arachne was not depicting their grandeur, but their flaws. Every mistake, every vice, every harsh treatment of an innocent mortal were laid bare on Arachne's tapestry. Gasps arose from the crowd as they saw what she was doing. Realizing that these were not gasps of appreciation for her own work, but gasps of shock for whatever Arachne was creating, Athena paused and turned to look at Arachne's loom.
You dare to not only compete with a goddess, but mock the gods themselves, she raged. I curse you! From now on and into eternity, all you and your descendants will ever do is weave. Unwound a skein of weft yarn from her shuttle and tossed a loop of it around the startled Arachne. As soon as the thread touched her skin, Arachne was transformed. Where once had stood a young woman industriously weaving her work of art, there now hung a spider, suspended from a translucent strand of web. Her tapestry was similarly transformed into the intricate gossamer of a giant spider's web. Athena stormed out of the house and vanished. And from that day to this, spiders weave their webs to catch prey and survive, but must constantly repair and recreate their web after the damage of catching bugs. They are always, always weaving. In addition to the genesis of actual spiders, Arachne's name lives on today in the words arachnid, which refers to arthropods like spiders and scorpions, and arachnophobia, fear of spiders. And the art and beauty of the webs created by her children continue to amaze us even to this day. The end. That's it for this month's bonus episode. I hope you enjoyed joining me for some thread-focused Greek mythology. I know I had fun adapting and retelling these stories. That's it for this month, but don't forget you can check out pictures of the farm and keep up with things at Foggy Oak Farm on Facebook or at Foggy Oak Fairy Tales on Instagram. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating and review for the podcast on the platform where you listen. It really makes a difference and makes my day. See you next month.